The final scene of Shutter Island appears to give us a simple answer. Andrew Laeddis once again calls Dr. Sheehan by the name Chuck, speaks as though he is still Marshal Teddy Daniels, and seems to fall back into the fantasy the doctors spent the entire film trying to dismantle. The staff accepts the failure, the order is given, and Andrew calmly walks toward the men who will erase what remains of him. But then he asks one question, whether it is worse to live as a monster or die as a good man. That question does not belong to the Teddy fantasy. It belongs to Andrew, the man who remembers what happened to his family and understands the punishment waiting for him. The film's real fault line is hidden inside this contradiction. Andrew performs the relapse, but his final words reveal awareness. He is not simply losing the truth again. He may be choosing to destroy the person who has to live with it. Notice how the scene is staged without the visual chaos that accompanies his earlier breakdowns. There is no frantic search, no hallucinated enemy, and no attempt to run. Andrew watches the doctors, understands their conclusion, and then gives Sheehan a sentence that only makes sense if he can compare the man he truly is with the hero he invented. The stillness is not proof by itself, but it changes the meaning of every gesture that follows. To understand the ending, we do not need to retell every clue on the island. We only need to understand what Teddy Daniels gives Andrew. Teddy is a federal marshal, a decorated veteran, a grieving husband, and a man hunting the evil responsible for destroying his family. Andrew is a patient who ignored his wife's worsening illness, found his children drowned, and then killed the woman he still loved. The invented identity reverses every unbearable part of that truth. Andrew becomes the investigator instead of the subject. His wife becomes a victim of someone else's violence. The hospital becomes a conspiracy, and his guilt becomes righteous suspicion. This is why factual proof alone cannot cure him. The fantasy is not a puzzle created because he lacks information. It is a moral structure created because he cannot survive the meaning of the information he already possesses. The name Teddy Daniels also gives Andrew a form of emotional distance. A marshal can examine bodies, question witnesses, and accuse institutions without ever becoming the person on trial. Even his obsession with exposing experiments at Ashcliffe protects him from the more intimate possibility that his own mind has created the prison. The conspiracy is enormous because the private truth is too close. By expanding his pain into a national crime, Andrew can treat guilt as evidence and grief as a mission. The film repeatedly separates Andrew's fantasy from his buried memory through two visual elements, fire and water. Fire belongs to the story he wants to tell. It surrounds visions of Dolores, supports the invented arson narrative, and gives him an external enemy named Laeddis. Fire transforms grief into a mystery that a marshal can solve. Water does the opposite. Water makes him physically sick before he even reaches the island. It appears whenever the fantasy begins to weaken, and it leads back to the lake where his children died. That pattern matters because the ending is not the first time Andrew encounters the truth. His body has been reacting to it throughout the film. The visions are not random horror images. They are a struggle between a comforting symbolic language and a memory that keeps returning in its actual form. Fire lets Teddy keep investigating. Water forces Andrew to remember. This contrast also explains why Dolores often appears impossibly beautiful inside scenes that are visibly breaking apart. She is not simply a ghost. She is the guardian of the version of events Andrew can endure. When ash falls from her body, the image supports the fire narrative. When water enters the memory, the fantasy loses control. The lake does not behave like another symbolic clue. It restores sequence, consequence, and responsibility. It is the place where the detective story stops and Andrew's actual life begins. The lighthouse is presented as the final destination of Teddy's investigation. He believes it contains the machinery of the conspiracy and the proof that will restore order to his world. Instead, the room at the top contains almost nothing except Dr. Colley, a desk, and an explanation. This emptiness is important. The film removes the spectacular villain because the true conflict cannot be defeated by finding evidence. Colley can demonstrate the anagrams, name the people in the roleplay, and reconstruct the deaths at the lake. He can make Andrew recognize himself for a moment. But recognition is not the same as recovery. The lighthouse solves the intellectual problem while leaving the moral wound untouched. Andrew now knows that Teddy is fictional, but the knowledge returns him to a life in which he believes his failures helped destroy everyone he loved. The truth wins the argument and still offers him no future. That is why Colley's success is so limited. He can lead Andrew from contradiction to contradiction until the false story collapses, but he cannot supply forgiveness. The institution treats memory as the missing medicine. The film shows that memory may also be the unbearable symptom. Andrew's tragedy is not that nobody tells him the truth. It is that the truth, once accepted, contains no version of himself he considers worthy of continuing. The lighthouse illuminates the past but offers no path back from it. There is a serious argument against the idea that Andrew consciously chooses his fate. The doctors tell us that he has reached clarity before and then retreated into the same delusion. His mind is unstable, his recognition may last only briefly, and calling she and Chuck could be exactly what it appears to be, another collapse. Even the final question can be read as a fragment of truth passing through a mind that has already lost its grip again. This interpretation matters because the ending should not be flattened into a clean act of rational suicide. Andrew is profoundly ill, and the film never gives us a clinical measurement of his awareness. But the staging pushes beyond a simple relapse. He waits until the staff believes Teddy has returned, speaks the question quietly to Sheehan, and then walks away without panic or resistance. The ambiguity is real, but his calmness makes deliberate surrender more persuasive than total confusion. The doctor's glance is especially important because it can support both readings. Colley sees another failed experiment. Sheehan appears to hear something more in Andrew's final sentence. He calls after him, but Andrew does not turn around. If the identity of Teddy has simply returned, that silence is ordinary confusion. If Andrew is lucid, it becomes the last boundary he deliberately places between himself and the one person who understands. The film refuses to confirm which interpretation is clinically correct, but it carefully makes the moral choice visible. The final scene works because Andrew's choice is neither recovery nor a simple return to madness. For one brief moment, he appears to understand both identities. He knows that Teddy Daniels is a heroic fiction, and he knows that Andrew Laeddis must live with a guilt he experiences as monstrous. When he asks whether it is worse to live as a monster or die as a good man, he describes the only options he believes remain. To live means remaining Andrew. To die as a good man means letting the institution destroy him while Teddy's moral story remains intact. This does not make the choice healthy, heroic, or fully rational. It makes it tragic. The treatment succeeds long enough for Andrew to recognize the truth, but not long enough to give him a reason to survive it. Shutter Island therefore ends not with the solution of a mystery, but with a man using the last moment of clarity available to him to choose the identity in which he can bear to disappear. The phrase, "die as a good man," therefore does not mean that Andrew believes the institution is right or that the procedure is merciful. It describes the final use of Teddy Daniels. Teddy can walk toward destruction believing he fought corruption and tried to save innocent people. Andrew would have to remain alive knowing that the person he failed to save was his own family. The invented hero becomes a final shelter, not from death, but from the identity that must experience it. That is why the ending remains powerful after the mystery is solved. The last decision is psychological, moral, and impossible to reduce to a twist.